So before I start, I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the Bedegal people, the traditional custodian of this land where we are having this meeting, and to elders past and present. So I get asked a lot of questions, a lot of welcome questions actually, when people find out that I've been to Gaza. I volunteered twice, as Hannah has said, once in October to November 2024 and once again in July this year. I returned at the end of July. Both times for 1 month, and both times at Nasser Medical Complex, which is in the south of Gaza, in Khan Yunis. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, how long does it take to fly from Sydney to Gaza? And the answer is, I don't know, because you don't. So this is what is left of Gaza International Airport. It's since been renamed Yasser Arafat International Airport. It was opened in 1998 and it served as the base for Palestinian Airlines, but ceased operations in 2001 during what is known as the Second Intifada. Despite the withdrawal of the Israeli forces in Gaza, it is still targeted routinely. Israel still controls all of Gaza's borders by air, land, and sea. The United Nations still actually regards Gaza as occupied territory due to the level of control that Israel has. So you can't fly there, and you certainly can't approach by sea, as we've all seen with the recent flotillas that have been stopped. So you get to Gaza by land. Since the occupation and closure of the Rafah border by the Israeli military in May 2024, the border that Egypt has with Gaza, the only way for Palestinians to leave and humanitarian personnel to enter Gaza is via a very circuitous route involving Jordan, the West Bank, and Israel. One of the other questions I get asked is how did you get involved? Why did you go to Gaza? How did you get involved? How do you get there? What do you do? So as I watched events unfold in October and November 2023, it became apparent that there was direct targeting of healthcare infrastructure and healthcare workers, healthcare facilities, everything. During the first week of the genocide, there were 94 attacks on healthcare facilities. By February 2024, it was reported that every hospital in Gaza is either damaged, destroyed, or out of service due to lack of fuel. From information mainly available on social media sites, it became apparent to me that not only were there a staggering amount of people requiring urgent medical attention due to missile strikes and bombardments, as well as the blockade of medicines, food, water, and fuel, and there was also an overwhelming need to supplement and support the healthcare workers that remained on the ground. Those that chose to and could afford to and be present when the border to Egypt was opened left. Those who remained may have been displaced due to evacuation orders or destruction of their homes. Some were unable to attend work as they had families to care for. Many were killed, many were abducted. So I started researching charities and aid organisations and NGOs. And NGOs, for those that you aren't sure about, it stands for non-governmental organisations. An example of a governmental organisation would be the Australian Defence Force. So, for example, the Australian Defence Force would be called on to provide assistance during bushfires or floods. NGOs are not affiliated or associated with government. They're often charities, but they are independent from government. So I began researching charities. I began learning Palestinian Arabic. I applied for Doctors Without Borders, or MSF. I booked my place on the Advanced Paediatric Life Support course. I did everything in my power to increase my chances of being selected for a mission. So my first deployment was with MAP, also known as Medical Aid for Palestinians. And the reason I went with them is because I literally typed into Google Medical Aid for Palestinians and it was the first hit. MAP has been working in Gaza and the West Bank and in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon since the early 80s. Have a look on their website and it'll give you a bit more about the background and why they do their work that they do. The aim of the organisation has always been to strengthen the local health systems through education and health programmes and providing support in the areas of child and maternal health, mental health and disability. Also has strong ties supporting and training doctors, especially in the field of surgery, and has strong ties with Nasser Medical Complex, which is run by the Gaza Ministry of Health. It was one of the first international NGOs to get EMTs, or emergency medical teams, on the ground. My second deployment was with a newer NGO, Ideals, another active NGO in Gaza, active since 2009, whose focus was associating with local healthcare workers, in this instance with orthopaedic and plastic reconstructive surgeons and allied health professionals such as physiotherapists. With this deployment in July this year, I formed part of a specialised care team, or SCT. It was myself, a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, and an orthopaedic surgeon. And along with the local healthcare teams, we performed up to 50 procedures a day. We could go for 24/7. The type of surgeries I'm talking about are infected limbs that have been amputated, or people with multiple shrapnel wounds, many of them children. So if you have a look at the slide behind me, you can see all these logos, and all these logos are EMT partners, and they provide medical health workers, along with the WHO and the Ministry of Health, to Ministry of Health hospitals and medical points in Gaza. And PANSMA's up there, PCRF is up there, and the PCRF now has an Australian arm, which is great news. These organisations send small teams to supplement the Ministry of Health hospitals, or to support locally run medical points. The larger groups such as MSF, UK Med and ICRC often have self-contained field hospitals staffed by local health workers and supplemented by international delegates from their international rosters. I just want to talk a little bit about medical points. These are very important areas where people could get health, especially in the tent encampments. These have become essential because of the devastation and destruction of fixed infrastructure. They provide general health services for things like child and maternal health, vaccinations, chronic disease such as high blood pressure, diabetes, infectious diseases, coughs, colds, gastro, and also mental health issues. We now know there's a huge mental health crisis in Gaza. They can be pop-up mobile tents, which can be moved quickly and moved to the heart of tent encampments, but conversely can be dismantled just as quickly when evacuation orders come through. One day I called a colleague working at a medical point to see if I could arrange a vaccination schedule for a child who had come from North Gaza for assessment for cleft lip and palate surgery. Childhood vaccines had not been available in their area for some time due to obstruction to WHO convoys by the Israeli military. As we were speaking on the phone, she told me she couldn't help as they were literally in the middle of packing up rapidly to move as much of the supplies and equipment as they could, as they had just had an evacuation order and they had to leave within 30 minutes. So how did I get to Gaza? How did I get there? Who took me? Why was I there? I found an organisation that would take me. I was able to get unpaid leave for the roughly 5 weeks I would need, and I submitted my paperwork, of which there was a lot. And that was about 6 months in advance of my travel. We only found out on the approved list 2 weeks before or so that we went, so even though we'd booked our tickets, there was still no guarantee. We were to arrive in Amman 2 days before rotating into Gaza on a bus that goes in. One bus goes in, one bus comes out. There's 2 days a week that happens. That's on a Tuesday and a Thursday. When I arrived, I had a bit of time to go and find some things that I needed and do a bit of sightseeing, which was quite nice, before meeting my team members who were flying in from Canada and the UK the next day. The top of the slide shows the blue boxes and indicates the amount of authorities and agencies that have to approve coordination and applications for entry, and these are both Jordanian and Israeli. It's important to note that the middle box, COGAT, control everything. Nothing and no one moves in or out of Gaza without clearance with COGAT. It stands for the Coordinator of Government Activities in the Territories. So in Amman, I met my colleagues. We attended an online briefing with the United Nations and the WHO, giving us details of what to expect and also strict instructions of what we could and couldn't take in to Israel and Gaza. 1 smartphone, 1 laptop, no satellite phones, 1,000 Israeli shekels, which is about $280 US, no medical equipment, no medication unless for personal use, no items on the dual use list. The dual use list is a list of items that have been deemed unable to enter Gaza because they may be used for other purposes than which they were intended. Those things include things like agricultural pipe, surfboards, toys, musical instruments. We were allowed one suitcase and one rucksack, and depending on the NGO you went with, you may have had to take your whole month's supply of food. Breach any of these rules and you risk being denied access at the borders, or even worse, your whole team would be denied entry. And this has happened multiple times. So we waited the night before, and even then we didn't know if we were to enter Gaza until about 4 p.m. When you get the green list come through. And the green list is when you know you're definitely going. And then so the night before is full of packing and unpacking, trying to fit everything into your bag, and you end up frazzled and you look like you're being dragged through a hedge backwards, and you look like the slide that you can identify up there, and my colleagues can probably understand that feeling. The trip into Gaza, you get up at 4:30 with your very heavy bag packed, after having only a few hours sleep, and you report to the jet bus company at the meeting point at 6 a.m. in Amman. I just want to talk a few minutes about borders. Despite Israel's previous disengagement from Gaza, it still controls entry to Gaza by land, sea and air, as we know. The Rafah border is the southern one on the Egyptian border at the bottom right hand of the slide. That was the main entry for EMTs for a long time. The other border crossing is at the top. Where are we? Top left of the slide, the Beit Hanun or Erez crossing. And that was the crossing used for people who worked in Jerusalem and needed to cross into Gaza. The other crossing is down below again, called the Kerem Shalom or the Kerem Abu Salem crossing, and that was mainly for the movement of goods. Currently, none of those crossings are open. Up until the first week of May 2024, Rafah was the entry point, as I said, but then that was taken and occupied by the Israeli military. So we arrive at the meeting point, we get on a bus, we take a 45-minute trip to the King Hussein or Allenby Bridge, which is the only border crossing that we are allowed to enter via between Jordan and the West Bank, and the sole entry-exit point for Palestinians wishing to leave the West Bank. There are usually around 30 people on the bus, a mix of United Nations and WHO staff, logistical staff, operative staff, administrative staff from very different organisations. Some are entering Gaza for the first time, some are returning after a period of respite or leave, some are EMTs. We haul our luggage onto the bus ourselves, and as I said, the luggage is very heavy. We haul it off and onto a scanner at the Jordanian side, and we pass through the Jordanian exit immigration. It's a fairly quick process with the occasional pat-down or passport scrutiny. We then haul our luggage again back onto the bus for the 10-15-minute journey across the bridge to the Israeli terminal. We take our luggage off the bus again and surrender our passports en masse to an immigration officer, which certainly makes you feel very vulnerable, as you're left without your passport for at least a few hours. We pass through a screening point, and then becomes the anxious wait to see if one's luggage is going to be opened and ransacked. And it's at this point where items are confiscated or individuals or whole teams are turned back. Once through this checkpoint, we obtain an entry ticket to Israel. Passports aren't usually stamped because if you have an Israeli stamp in your passport, it can often limit countries which you visit afterwards. We get on board a completely different bus after hauling our heavy luggage on again, and we pass from the West Bank through a checkpoint into Jerusalem, and then we're accompanied by a military escort front and back of the bus on a non-stop journey, stopping only in the event of an air raid siren, towards the Kisufim crossing, which is halfway down that map, to cross into Gaza. It takes about 3 hours for this journey. Around this time, it's probably about midday, 1 o'clock, and we're all absolutely exhausted. The Kisufim crossing is like a large car park in the middle of nowhere with the occasional tank rumbling past in the desert sands, and you can see Gaza through the wire fences. You can also see the high surveillance towers and the tower-mounted machine guns. There are tarmacked roads, but these are only for military vehicles. These roads have been newly built, but we won't be using them. We will be entering armoured four-wheel drive vehicles, and we will be travelling on dust and dirt roads. 4 people to each vehicle. There's a convoy of 7 of us. We exit our bus after a sombre passport check by the military and then move on, following instructions issued to us by the military. It's very intimidating. We claim our bags and we put on PPE, personal protective equipment. In this context, not masks and surgical gowns and gloves, but hard hats and lead vests, we get into our designated vehicle. And the whole journey can take up to 14 hours depending on military action and other total unknown delays. There may be frequent stops or there may be none. It's different each time. What I do know is that each time I've actually got into Gaza and got into that vehicle, I've felt a huge sense of relief. So this is Nasser Medical Complex. You may have seen it on the news. This is where I spent both of my months. I worked in main theatres, maternity theatres, burns and plastic theatres. I also worked in the intensive care unit and the emergency department. Mass casualty incidents were occurring around the clock. There was no official start and end to our working day. We had no roster. We also weren't allowed to leave the compound. Any movement outside the compound required the coordination with the Israeli authority and military and wasn't guaranteed to be granted and needed at least 24-hour clearance. It was there that I witnessed the expertise, resilience and kindness of people under siege. I also witnessed injustice and unnecessary cruel suffering. I made lifelong friends there. I worked with the best healthcare staff in the harshest of conditions, and we did our best. And so then it was time to say goodbye. We would be heading for our safe house in Deir al-Balah the evening before our exit from Gaza the next day. And I said goodbye to how shall I say, my flatmates, people I shared the accommodation with. Doctors and nurses from all around the world who I ate, worked, slept with, rested with, joked with, cried with. I ate a last afternoon tea with my friends who had driven 3 hours through crowded streets to bring me some fruit from their small garden. We were delegations from all over the world, standing in solidarity with our Palestinian colleagues. I left with a small backpack, everything given away. Sheets, coffee, Panadol, shoes. I even titrated my shampoo and body wash into syringes so that I could wash the next day. And then the last picture of what I consider to be one of the most beautiful sunsets in the world. But it wasn't to be. When I woke up at around midnight, 5 hours before we were due to leave, I saw this message on my phone. That refers to our exit rotation out of Gaza. I woke my colleague and we were sharing a mattress and a sheet on the floor of the safe house. And we sat around for a bit, listening to the ongoing thuds and explosions. And we said, what should we do? And we decided that we'd go back to the hospital the next day, carry on working, till we had news about what was happening. The bombs didn't sound so loud there. So we returned the next day at lunchtime. We couldn't go in the morning because there was F-16 strikes continuing, which hindered our movement. We returned to a mass casualty incident, a mass shooting that had occurred at one of the infamous Israeli-US Gaza Humanitarian Fund aid sites. There were hundreds of boys and men, I joke you not, hundreds of people lying all over the floor, gunshot injuries. I couldn't avoid treading on people to reach this young lad, who was probably about 14 years old, shot through the neck with an exit wound through his cheek. He was not moving the right side of his body and his blood pressure was falling. He was on his own. We continued to treat babies and children with burns and fractures from explosions. We resuscitated people whose limbs had been blown off. And we pulled endless shrapnel from multiple members of the same family, family after family. About 3 days later, we were informed a special rotation had been organised for us to leave. We also found out that our previous exit was cancelled because the UN had been unable to get a guarantee of safe passage from the Israeli military. We also found out that 2 humanitarian rotations had been cancelled coming in. So, in conclusion, these cumbersome procedures for international humanitarian personnel to access Gaza, along with the appalling obstruction by the Israeli government of food, water, shelter and medicine, are having devastating consequences for all Palestinians. And so this is a final word. I want to honour Dr. Taj. He is a 26-year-old junior doctor in his internship, and he wants to specialise in obs and gynae. He spent every day with me pretty much during my time in Gaza in October, November last year. He would come and wait for me in the morning, and he would accompany me to wherever I needed to go to work that day. His specialist training had been suspended, and he was doing shifts in the emergency department, unpaid, and at the UK Medfield Hospital. He would come and he would say to me in the morning, "Where would you like to go today, Dr. Saira? Where are you working today?" And I say, "Oh, let's not go to work, Taj. Let's go to the beach, or let's go to the markets, or hey, let's go see your family." But of course we couldn't. We would share a breakfast of an Aldi peanut butter protein bar, and he would meet me later in the evening when he would collate all my clinical encounters for submission to the WHO reporting system. He helped me with my Arabic, and I helped him with his renal physiology. No one has heard from him since April this year, when he went back to the north to find his family. For Taj.